Great to be with you. I'm going to move really fast tonight, so buckle up, get ready. I'm going to start with kind of where we are in the nation. A good friend of mine is George Barton. George, you may be aware of, is one of the most cited national cultures in America. He now heads what's called the American Culture Faith Institute. George and I recently did a book together, had a lot of fun looking at where America is, where it was 50 years ago, and what we do to get in the right direction. But when you look at where America is, there's some interesting things in our polling that comes out. For example, right now, 2 in 3 Americans believe there is no absolute moral truth. And that's amazing that 2 in 3 Americans believe there's nothing that's absolutely morally wrong. You would think there's something like rape or murder or whatever. But polling-wise, 2 out of 3 Americans say, well, it depends on the condition, depends on the circumstance, and well, I'm not really sure it's individually determined. So we're in an interesting place, but the problem is Christians are there as well. 2 out of 3 Christians say there is no absolute moral truth. With millennials, it's 4 out of 5 millennials that say that. So as you look to the future, we're moving away from what used to be considered fixed absolutes. Now, within that framework, if there are no absolutes, and that's kind of what we teach today, there are no absolutes, then that means we're open for continual change. Since nothing is absolute, everything is always changing. And since everything is always changing, that's part of what we see happening in the culture in so many areas, is change rapidly occurring. For example, let me give you the example of military. It is now changing in the last 2 years. We're a very military family. We have 2 of our kids on active duty. We have a lot of family members in the military right now. And if you look at military, for example, if you take somebody like a paratrooper, and one of the members of our family is an Army Ranger, and they do paratroop stuff all the time. We've got another one in the family that's part of the airborne. These guys, what they go through, that pack they have on the front is 53 pounds. So they have a 53-pound parachute pack in addition to all the ruck and stuff they carry, which puts about 100 pounds, sometimes over that. That's a lot of stuff. And if you think about having to do what they do and go where they go with all that stuff, that's tough on the knees, it's tough on the hips, it's tough on the ankles, it's just tough on their body in general. And they do all these long marches with all this kind of stuff. And so if I could ever be the Secretary of Defense, if I could be in charge of all the military, what I would do is I would change things, because right now their parachutes are 28 feet wide, weigh 53 pounds. If I could ever be in charge, I would make sure that no parachute was more than 5 feet wide, 9 pounds. Think what it would do to their health. It would kill all of them. Nobody's going to land with a 5-foot parachute. But it's a great idea. I want to help them out. See, we come up with all these great ideas and we don't test them to see whether they work or not. And that's what we have been doing in the military for the last 2 presidential terms. President Trump has stopped that. We're able to get 138 military guys with them 4 stars down and talk to them about social engineering that was happening in the military, because we're putting all this stuff on guys without ever having tested any of it, and it wasn't working. But now it's in place, so how do you get rid of it? So that's what President Trump is dealing with right now. And how do I get rid of that transgender policy that's implemented, because it's killed morale. Those guys are non-deployable for up to a year at a time. Kills cohesion, etc. So there's so many stuff there. But see, military, we make all these changes just because we need to change. It's time for change. There are no absolutes, therefore we're always doing continual change. The same thing happens when you get to education. That's why we did Common Core. It was touted to be all this internationally normed stuff, and it was never tested anywhere. And the states that first went into it, from New York to Kentucky to other states, they've been in it now 10 years, and their educational scores have shot through the floor. It was supposed to be a great idea. Yeah, but nobody ever tried it before they put it in there. It's just time for something different. We got to have something. And about every 20 years in education, we come through something else. If you guys remember back, we had outcome-based education goals, 2000, all this stuff. Every 20 years, we got to do something different because it's time for something. How about let's do what works? You have the same thing with government economics. This is significant to me because if you remember back to the presidential election of 2016, we started that election with 22 candidates running off, 17 on the Republican side, 5 on the Democrat side. I was running a PAC for one of the presidential candidates, a super PAC for them. And so we were all concerned about Iowa, because that's the first state, that's where everything starts, is the Iowa caucuses, so we're all there. We're doing all of our polling to see who's going to turn out for our guy, who's going to turn out for their guys, what kind of ads do we need to run, what kind of grassroots campaign. And so in doing it, what was really shocking to everyone was what we found was the youth vote. And the youth vote has been increasing. It's significant. One of the things that we kept reminding Ted Cruz was, you keep talking about Reagan more than Reagan talks about Reagan. You know his speeches better than he knew his speeches. The problem you've got is 41% of the people who voted in the 2016 election did not live in the time of Ronald Reagan. They didn't have a clue who he was. And so you're talking speeches, people who've never heard those speeches, you got to take those things. And so, we're concerned about how we do what we do with communication, etc. And so what we found was when we surveyed that group, where 41% of voters are coming out of young voters, what we found was that 75% of those voters chose Bernie Sanders. Now consider, There are 22 choices. So somebody ought to get 7%, somebody ought to get 6%, somebody might get 11%. No, 75% went here. And he was the only open socialist in the entire campaign. And so you say, now what do kids like that? And so what you look at is, well, what's being taught in the last generation or so. And what's being taught, and by the way, here's the Washington Post. Millennials are the only age group in America in which a majority views socialism favorably. Only age group. A Harvard University survey found that 51% do not support capitalism. Millennials have a higher opinion of socialism than of capitalism. Moreover, Gallup has found that an astounding 69% of millennials say they'd be willing to vote for a socialist candidate, which is what we saw in Iowa. Among their parents' generation, only a third would do so. Look at the huge change in one generation. Since what's being taught in education, we continue. 52% of millennials favor big government compared with 38% of the nation overall. So we're looking at change because it's time to change. Because see, what the millennials have been taught is that capitalism is bad, socialism is good. Here's the way it's explained to them. If you have socialism, you have high quality and high freedom. If you have capitalism, you have low equality and high freedom. Now, given that contrast, who would not choose socialism? If I can have high freedom in both of them, and one gives me high quality and the other doesn't, I'm going with high in both. See, but the problem was, in polling these kids, we asked them, can you give a single example in history, in the history of the world, where socialism has increased freedom and increased prosperity? Could not give a single historical example. We said, can you define socialism? Not a single one of them could give a definition of it. They don't know what it is, don't know where it's worked, but they know what they've been taught. And so this is what happens. We're just changing our form of government because it's time for a change. We're tired of the old stuff. We've had free market for 4 centuries. Who needs that anymore? So that's for what we see in government economics history. This is one of interest to me. When you look at what's happening in history, the American College of Trustees and Alumni, every year they take the U.S. News and World Report list of the elite colleges and universities in America, and they looked recently to say, all right, how do the elite colleges, and there were 76 elite colleges and universities, how do they deal with history majors? If you're going to be a history major, what do you get those schools? And history, what do you do with a history degree? You go back and become a curriculum director at a school or you teach history or something. And so the report, they called their report, America's Past Passed Over, because what they found is in the top 76 universities in America, if you go there to get a history degree, you will not have a single course in American history to get your history degree. So you're going all the way through a history degree, you're going to come back and teach a school, and you've never had a course on American history. Amazing stuff. Which is why you see headlines like this one. This is George Washington University removes U.S. history from required courses for history majors. I mean, they won't even know who George Washington is in 20 years. It'll be a history university, and they won't even know who that guy is. By the way, one of our speakers, we do a lot of high schools, universities, etc. And in the last 2 to 3 years, we have this little game show that we do at high schools, and we give out these gift cards to the winning team. And so we'll do pop culture and take them through, basketball stars, and take them through athletes, and take them through music, and take them through movies. And you show a 3-second clip, and you get an instant answer. Then we say, let's go old school for a while. We'll put up a picture of George Washington. So far, no kid has recognized George Washington. When we put that picture up, we still got the same gift card. I mean, just it hasn't been used. So that's somebody who's disappeared. And the same way you see this headline, Washington Post, University of Wisconsin campus pushes plans to drop 13 majors, including history. You can't even have a history major now, even if you want to go there. So this is another change that we're having in history. We have the same kind of change with Constitution. This thing is so old, it's so outdated. I mean, you need a living document. These guys, my gosh, when they lived back then 200 years ago, think how different life was. I mean, this thing is completely outdated. These guys should not be ruling us today. And this is very appealing for young people, that dad should not rule the living. That's exactly right. That's what we think. We don't want to be bound by old stuff. We want our own stuff. We want to make our own decisions. So this is the way universities present the Constitution. This is the way law schools often present it. They say, the Founding Fathers, these guys, I mean, look back to what they did. When they were writing, they had quills and ink. Look how far we've evolved since that period of time. And when you look at what they did for transportation, their transportation was horses and buggies or walking. Or look how much we've evolved since that period of time. So what the kids are told is, do you really want to be bound by something that was done back then when they didn't even have a clue what we're dealing with today? And that's a very appealing thing. And by the way, you'll find that picked up not only by profession and academia, you find it with judges as well. This is Judge Richard Posner, the 7th Federal Circuit Court of Appeals, and he very clearly is calling on U.S. Constitution. Judges should stop studying it. This thing is outdated, written 200 years ago. They have no clue what we face today. Judges should not even look at the Constitution anymore. You have the same thing with Justice Breyer. Justice Breyer on the U.S. Supreme Court recently wrote this book, The Court and the World. It's time for us to get rid of the Constitution. We've got to move away from this. And when the court goes into its session at the end of June, throughout from June through October, people like Justice Ginsburg, she travels the globe helping other nations with their judiciary. She goes across the globe saying, look, do not copy the American Constitution. It's terrible. If you want a constitution that works, choose South Africa, and she goes to all these other countries. Anything but the American Constitution. So these are Supreme Court justices, these are Court of Appeal justices saying, you got to get away from this document. This is what kids get on a regular basis today. So what's the response to this thing that we've evolved past where they were 200 years ago? The answer that I have for that comes really out of science. What I do is I take kids back to this. I was recently in Ukraine. Ukraine asked if we'd come over there and help them do a constitution because they had their new constitution in 1992 when they left the Soviet Union. They didn't know anything about constitutions per se, and so the document's not really working the way they want to, so they want a new one. So I went over and spoke at their law schools and their government schools, etc. And explain, because all the young people across the world, they all want something visionary. They want something right now. They don't want really old stuff. And so how do you explain it? I said, well, let me take you through some science, guys. If I take you through guys, for example, like Johannes Kepler. Kepler, we're talking 400 years ago for Kepler. Now, Kepler is the guy who gave us the laws of planetary motion. And the laws of, we use the laws of planetary motion today, and that's how come we do space travel. And, you know, Trump wants to do the mission to Mars. We can only do that because we understand Kepler's laws. But those are hundreds-of-year-old laws. Yeah, that's right, but they still work today. You have the same thing when you go to Boyle's laws of gases. It's because of Boyle's laws of gases that I can scuba dive. Now, I guarantee you, 400 years ago when he found that, he was not thinking of anyone being underwater, breathing underwater. It never crossed his mind. Doesn't matter. The laws are timeless. They work across all time, all generations. They're not bound by technology. We change technology, but without understanding the principles under technology will never work. You have the same thing that happens with Blaise Pascal. Pascal's laws of fluid pressure. This is why ESPN2, because of what he did 400 years ago, that's why ESPN2 could always have the competition on lowriders. I guarantee you, he didn't have any idea of cars bouncing 8 feet in the air. He didn't even know what a car was. He didn't even know what a car would do. Doesn't matter. We use his principles from 400 years ago to do the stuff that we do today. In the same way, if you go to Isaac Newton, he has the laws of motion. He also has the laws of gravity. I'm a pilot. The only reason I can fly is because we understand the laws of motion, specifically how to overcome the second law of motion. If a pilot can't understand the second law of motion, you will never get a plane off the ground. So you look at all these things that come from 400 years ago, how come we still use them today? It's only technology that changes from generation to generation. Principles do not change. It is actually timeless principles that produce new things. If you understand the principles, you can add the technology and get something really cool out of it. So you always go back to the timeless principles. And that's what I want to do in the time that I've got left, is take you back to some key principles that most Americans have not been taught today, at least can't identify in a very clear way. So let me take you back to George Mason. He's a founding father, one of the 55 who did the Constitution of the United States. He's one of the 16 who did not sign the Constitution because he said, we need more limits on the federal government. So he's the guy who goes back and helps does the Bill of Rights. He is called the father of the Bill of Rights because he wanted to see more limits on the federal government, which is why the Bill of Rights was added. Interestingly, he is an author of the original Constitution of Virginia in 1776. He has a statement of that Constitution so good that they have left it in over subsequent constitutions. As Virginia gets new constitutions to keep the statement in, this is what he said. He says, no free government, nor the blessings of liberty, can be preserved in any people, but by a frequent recurrence to fundamental principles. You got to keep going back to fundamental principles. I will point out that even today, here we are in the middle of athletic season. We're looking at the football starting. We're in the middle of baseball season. We got hockey ending. We got basketball ending. Every professional athlete who is the best athlete that's out there in their thing, you take the MVP of any league. The MVP of any league is only the athlete who can do the basics the best. They do the fundamentals better. That's what spring training is all about. You get the best athletes in the world, say, okay guys, let's go back to pitching and throwing and fielding and hitting. And the MVP is the one who can do the fundamentals the best. And so that's what you keep going back to, is the fundamentals. You don't come up with different fundamentals. The fundamentals are timeless. They're across time. So having said that, America today is very unique. What we have with our form of government, by the way, there's 195 nations in the world this year at the UN. You look at what we have one Constitution. We got that Constitution in 1789. Look at what's happened to other nations since 1789 and the number of constitutions that they have had. Imagine living in nations where you have constitutions this often, this many in a short period of time. It's amazing. Americans, we take our civility for granted. We're so used to civility, we just kind of think that's the way it is with the rest of the world. It's not. What America has is absolutely unique. I was recently in Poland. I talked to people in Poland that in their lifetime they have already, they themselves personally, have lived through 7 different constitutions in Poland. If you are a baby boomer in South Korea, you have lived through 6 constitutions in your lifetime as a baby boomer. Do you know what the average length of constitution in the history of the world is? Average length of constitution in the history of the world is 17 years. Guess what? We've been 230 years. I kind of think I want to keep that one. I don't want to really get rid of that. I don't need a revolutionary. These aren't the stats that kids get. This is not what kids get in college. There's no way they get these stats. If you look at creativity, we have a lot of ways of measuring that, international copyrights, patents, etc. When you look, America is 4% of the world's population, which is not very big, but every year we produce more inventions, more cures, more medical technologies, more scientific findings. We produce more plays, more symphonies, more patents, more copyrights than the other 96% of the world combined. You see, America, with 4% of the world's population, should produce 4% of the world's technology. Not the case. Our 4% produces more than the other 96%. I was recently in Germany. While I was there, I stayed at a nice 5-star hotel. Germany is one of the wealthier places in Europe. At that great 5-star hotel, it would have been really cool if I could have had internet at the hotel. We've got internet in Motel 6s over here. You get a 5-star over there and you're looking for internet. See, the technology, we just take it for granted. It's so much around us, we just think this is the way it is. It's not. And when you look at our prosperity, our 4% of the world's population every year produces 25% of the world's GDP. We produce more than any other nation in the world, and we don't have the greatest natural resources. Many countries have greater resources than we do. We take what we have and make it go further than anybody else. That is called American exceptionalism. That is a term that came to us in 1831 when Lexington Tocqueville came here and said America's exceptional. I don't think any other nation would be able to do what they've done. Now, when you look at exceptionalism, today professors will go through the roof. I did a book a couple of years ago talking about American exceptionalism. Boy, did the professors come out of the woodwork to attack. How dare you say America's special? Look, saying American's exceptional is not a statement of arrogance. It's not a statement of cockiness or pride. It's a statement of fact. That's just the way it is. And it's not that we're special and we're different and we're better. It's that we use ideas that are different from other nations. And you see, when you look at what we have, professors never get around to defining American exceptionalism. They say it doesn't exist. Let me show you what American exceptionalism is. American exceptionalism describes the unprecedented stability, freedom, and prosperity that's the result of institutions and policies that are produced by unique governing philosophy. Now notice the sequence. The fruit comes from the infrastructure which is produced by a philosophy, unique governing philosophy. So the philosophy is the most important thing because that's what produces the infrastructure, institutions, and policies, and that's what produces what everybody likes and enjoys. You see, if you go back to 8th grade earth science, we taught this in the way of talking about fruit trees. We said every fruit tree has 3 parts. You have the first part, which is at the bottom, and that's where you plant the seed or the seedling. Then that grows into the trunk and the branch and the infrastructure, and that eventually produces the fruit. Well, what you have at the bottom, what you plant right here, is the seed, and that's the philosophy of government. We planted a philosophy of government. From that philosophy of government grew our infrastructure, which is our institution policy, and from that came the fruit that we all enjoy today, the stability, the freedom, the prosperity. And you see, the key part is what you plant at the bottom. Any nation in the world can have the same results we have if they have the same philosophy we have. In other words, if you like apples, don't plant a lemon seed because you're not going to get apples off an apple tree. It's what you plant at the beginning that causes everything else to grow. And this is what we don't teach anymore, is what is the philosophy we planted at the beginning. So when you look at the philosophy we planted at the beginning, it's set forth very clearly in the founding document. The very first document, when the founding fathers said, hey, rest of the world, listen up. We're going to tell you exactly why we're becoming an independent nation. That's in the Declaration of Independence. They gave in 126 words 5 very simple principles. Everything in the Constitution goes to those 5 principles. That is the foundation on which the Constitution is built. If you don't understand these 5 principles, you'll never get how American government works. So let me take you through them quickly. Those 126 words very simply says, this is what the founding fathers told the rest of the world. Here's our philosophy. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal stations to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitled them, A decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Now, in there's 5 very clear statements on what government is, how we did it, what our philosophy. This is what we planted. This is the philosophy from which everything else grew. So let me take them in order. If I take the first one of these 5 principles, it's very simple. It's the laws of nature, nature's God. That doesn't mean a whole lot to us today, but to them, they said very clearly, this is established in there as a fixed moral law of right and wrong. The laws of nature, nature's God. I will show you their definition of that. But they said there's absolute rights and wrongs. There's certain things that are always wrong, certain things that are always right. That's the laws of nature, nature's God. Once you get that, then you can say there's absolute truth. Because once you know what rights and wrongs are, then you can identify with, if there's no rights and wrongs, then truth is merely your opinion. It's all subjective. I can individually determine what truth is. That's your opinion, but I have a different. Now, if there are absolute rights and wrongs, now you can establish truth, and that's why they said we hold these truths to be self-evident. Only after they establish the laws of nature, nature's God, they get around to saying there are certain truths that are self-evident. So let me take you into that phrase. 8 words, the laws of nature, nature's God. It came from the most famous law book of that day, Blackstone's Commentaries on the Law. Thomas Jefferson said that Americans studied Blackstone's commentaries like Muslims studied the Quran. This is what every American was in. Blackstone, 4-volume set of law books, in Volume 1, Chapter 2, on the nature of laws, he said those 8 words represent 2 revelations of God. It's the same God, 2 revelations. One is what he revealed in nature. In Romans 1, Paul says everything that can be known about God, including the intricacies of Godhead, have been revealed through what God has created, so that even the heathen are without excuse. So in Romans 1:20, the Bible says everything about God you can see in creation. Now, as Blackstone pointed out, when Adam sinned, sin came in the world, it messed up our thinking, it wasn't as clear, so God said, let me just help you, I'll write it down for you. So that's the laws of nature's God, that's the scriptures. So there's the laws that God put in nature, and then when we didn't get that, he said, let me just write it down. That's the laws of the God who created nature. So the laws of nature, nature's God, 2 revelations of God, but they have the same point. I can take and arrive at rights and wrongs, absolute rights and wrongs, absolute truth, without ever opening the Bible, simply by using nature. Let me take you back to that for a minute. If we look at the laws of nature on something like self-defense. Now, I'm a cowboy. Our ranch is out in Jack County. What I do is I love horses. As a matter of fact, tomorrow morning I fly out with the cowboys. We're going out to western New Mexico on some horse stuff out there. So we'll be out there, and when you do cowboy stuff on a horse, you've got to have a horse you can really connect with. Cowboy life is a little different from everything else. As a matter of fact, we end up in very rugged places. On this particular trip where we were with cowboys, there was times when my right stirrup was hanging almost 200 feet over the floor below me. So if my horse steps wrong by 6 inches, it goes off, I go off, we both die. I mean, you got to have a horse you trust, and you got to have a great relationship with that horse. If that horse is going to act stupid, it'll kill you. And so we've got to have a great relationship, and that's what I've learned about my horse. And great mare, just great horse, until she had a foal. And when she had that foal, you go in the barn and feed her, you come out with a hook right in the middle of your forehead. Suddenly, this great relationship we had changes, because you see, God has put into the nature of everything He's created that they will defend their own life, they will defend the life of their family, and they will defend their property. She chased me out of the barn because she thinks that's her home. Now, I built the barn, I put her in there, but she thinks it's hers. I give her the food. The thing is, it is a law of nature. No law Congress can pass can keep an animal from trying to defend its own life, or the life of its family, or its own property. That's a law. I do not need the Bible, and I can show you all the Bible verses on self-defense. I don't need them. Law of nature says there's a right of self-defense. That's an inalienable right given in the Bill of Rights, Second Amendment particularly. You also have liberty. There are 10 million known species in nature. Not a single species out of 10 million enslaves any other species. You see, liberty is a law of nature. There's nothing where slavery exists in nature. Well, why didn't the Founding Fathers get that? That's our screwed up American education today. 3 out of 4 Founding Fathers, 75% were anti-slavery, led anti-slavery societies, led anti-slavery movements, and those anti-slavery Founding Fathers told the 4th that we're pro-slavery guys, what you're doing is violates the laws of nature and the laws of nature's God. Not only is there nothing in nature that does slavery, we can show you Luke 4, we can show you Isaiah 63, we can show you all the other passages where slavery is wrong. But today all we teach in schools is pro-slavery Founding Fathers, so we can say, oh, the Founding Fathers were all racist and bigots. We need a new Constitution. Now, how about the 3/4 that got it right, that used the laws of nature and nature's God? The same way with abortion, 10 million species in nature, not a single species kills its young while it's still in the womb. And I don't care whether you believe in creation or evolution, if you take either process, nothing kills its young while it's still in the womb. That violates natural law. And I can show you the scriptures where abortion is wrong, don't need to. Laws of nature. Nature tells me it's wrong. Same with 10 million species in nature, homosexuality. Less than a dozen species have any instance of homosexuality, and in no species is it a lifestyle. There's no lifestyle in nature that's a homosexual lifestyle. It occurs occasionally, but even in those species, it's always an aberration. So I don't need the Bible to tell me homosexuality is wrong. The laws of nature tell me it's wrong. By the way, up to 15, I've been involved in 7 cases in the U.S. Supreme Court. Up to 15 years ago, the U.S. Supreme Court, not a religious body at all, used to say that homosexuality was a, quote, crime against nature. They weren't using the Bible to reach that conclusion. The laws of nature reached that conclusion for them. So there's that. The next one, transgender. I'm going back to cowboy days a little earlier. I was out in North Dakota. This is the Badlands in North Dakota. We were doing a cattle drive with some ranchers out there, and they needed help, so we went out to help them with the cattle drive. And while we're out there, we have to go through all these canyons and chase the cattle out. And so we get them up on top, and we have a cattle drive that goes across the top. So we have about 1,200 cattle we're driving across the top. And what we do is after we get them going across the top, we drive them in the pens. And once we get them in the pens, what we're after is all these calves over here because they need to be vaccinated. There's 7 different diseases they can get. So we need to vaccinate them. We need to check them, make sure they're healthy. So what we do is we send cowboys into the pen. They will rope a calf. They will bring that calf out. When that calf comes out, there's 4 or 5 of us who drop down on the calf. I happen to be the one in the blue plaid shirt. So we've got the calf on the ground. I'll drop down. I'll start giving it vaccinations and shots, etc. Interesting thing. All these families, these cowboy families come together, all the ranches help each other, and they go from one ranch to the next, and we all help each other. We have cowboys and cowgirls all working out there. This on the left is a cowgirl, that guy on the right is a cowboy. They're all off the ranches. You know, we dealt with 580 calves that day. Nobody had any trouble telling which was a male and which was a female calf. Everything in nature is really simple. See, for 5,500 years, it used to be that if you wanted to know your gender, you looked between your legs. Now you look between your ears. That is crazy stuff. 92 different legally identified genders today. 92 legally identified genders. Last I checked on Facebook about 2 months ago, there are 71 genders from which you can choose for your profile on Facebook. No, there's 2 genders. There's male and female. And by the way, the Bible 4 times says that He made them male and female. So I've got the laws of nature and the laws of nature's God. I can go on through things like property. Any species, once it comes in the world, it will stake out what it considers to be its own. It will defend it. When it dies, somebody else will get it. Just like when we die, our kids get our property or somebody else does. You have the right of association. I've got the right to hang with whoever. If I'm an Angus cow, I can hang with the Holsteins if I want to. I can go over here to the Guernseys. I can go to the Charolais. I can go wherever I want. The government, they said, no, you're a photographer. You've got to hang with this herd. If you're a cook, you have to hang with this. Government telling us who we have to hang with. Are you kidding me? It's a natural right, which is why it was a First Amendment right. It's an inalienable right. That God gave you the right to associate where you want to. You also have the right of accumulation of profit. You know, nowhere in nature does God say, Mr. Squirrel, if you've gathered too many acorns, go share them with the rest of the world. Never happens. You have the right to accumulate as much as you want and hold it. You have the right to make as much profit as you can. That's all laws of nature, nature's God. So that's what they talked about. Now, if I go into things like theft, this is a little problematic because, at least for my horses, when I feed my 4 horses, none of them eat their own food. They all go steal it from the other 3. The same thing with adultery. Monogamy is not common in nature. That's why you have 1 bull and 20 cows in every herd. Monogamy is not common. Incest, this is why a cowboy will not ride a Mustang, generally speaking. Mustangs have been inbred for so many generations. They're much smaller. They have much less stamina. They just can't stand up to the work. And the same with murder. You know, in nature, so many things eat for food, but look at a skunk. Skunk goes into a hen house, well, they make a bloody mess, and they don't eat anything. They just bite the heads off the chickens and sling the body around, you get blood all over the wall. They're murderers, big time. So if we're saying the laws of nature tell us what's right and wrong, what do you do with that? Well, this is where Blackstone said, well, you also have the laws of nature's God. If nature doesn't make it real clear, the Scripture does, which is why you have the 10 Commandments that say, don't steal, don't commit adultery, don't commit murder. So between the laws of nature and nature's God, you have a complete system of what's right and wrong. And the Founding Fathers said that was the common law, which is the 7th Amendment of the Constitution recognizes the common law. So that was the moral basis. That was the foundation of what you have, how you knew what was right and wrong. So that's where they start. Once you get those rights and wrongs, then you can say what is true and what is not true. Now, the second thing they pointed to, they said all men are created equal. They're endowed by their Creator. What they did here, they said, we officially recognize that there is a Creator God. Now, these cases I've been involved in the Supreme Court, they've all dealt with a religious expression. And the court said, well,